You're standing at the edge of a jungle on an island in what's now Indonesia. It's roughly 50,000 years ago. You and your group just crossed open water to get here. A genuine achievement, since your species is currently in the middle of spreading across the entire planet, and this island is one of the last stops. Something is watching you from the tree line. It's small, barely over a meter tall. And here's the part that stops you cold. It's not a child. Fully grown, adult proportions, dark, deliberate eyes, watching you the exact same way you're watching it. You are not looking at an animal. You're looking at another kind of human. For a long time, that sentence would have sounded like fiction. On the island of Flores, locals have a story they still tell. Small, hairy, cave-dwelling people called the Ebu Gogo, who mimicked speech without truly speaking it, stole food from villages at night, and vanished generations ago. Outsiders treated it exactly the way you'd expect. A folk tale, a boogeyman story to keep kids close to the fire. Then, in 2003, a dig at a cave called Liang Bua turned up something that made that story a lot less comfortable. Here's the thing. Paleoanthropologists Peter Brown and Mike Morwood's team pulled a nearly complete skeleton out of the sediment. Adult female, fully grown, standing about 1.1 meters tall, smaller than the average 6-year-old today, and weighing roughly 25 kilograms. Her brain measured around 426 cubic centimeters. That's chimpanzee-sized. 426 cubic centimeters. Let that sink in. She wasn't diseased. She wasn't a deformed modern human, despite a genuinely loud group of scientists insisting exactly that for years afterward. She was something else entirely, a separate species, later named Homo floresiensis, immediately nicknamed the Hobbit by a press that for once undersold the story. So the islanders may have spent generations scaring their kids with bedtime stories about a real extinct species of human relative and gotten disturbingly close to the truth. Which raises the obvious questions. How does a full species of tiny humans end up on one island in Indonesia? And what eventually happened to them? Start with the size, because it's not random. It's a documented evolutionary pattern called island dwarfism, sometimes called Foster's rule, and the mechanism is simple. Strand a population of large animals on an island with limited food and few real predators, and over enough generations, natural selection quietly favors the individuals who need less to survive. It's happened repeatedly, on islands worldwide. Flores had already been running that experiment on everything else. Alongside Homo floresiensis lived Stegodon, a genus of elephant shrunk to a fraction of its mainland size. Komodo dragons prowled the same ground. So did an enormous flightless stork, Leptoptilus robustus, standing nearly 2 meters tall enough and hungry enough to have preyed on a 1.1 meter hominin directly. This wasn't a gentle island paradise. It was a pressure cooker, and Homo floresiensis appears to be one of its outcomes, most likely descended from an earlier wave of Homo erectus that reached Flores roughly 1 million years ago and spent hundreds of thousands of generations quietly shrinking to fit it. Imagine actually living there. Stone flakes found alongside the bones show these were competent tool makers, sharp-edged blades used for butchering, including almost certainly juvenile stegodon. Picture a group barely over 1 meter tall, taking down baby dwarf elephants with stone tools while a 2-meter stork watches from the reeds, deciding whether today's the day it eats one of you instead. That's not a rare bad afternoon. That's Tuesday, for roughly 1 million years straight. Here's where it gets weirder, though. Paleoanthropologist Matthew Tocheri examined the wrist and hand bones and found them more primitive than a downsized Homo erectus should have, closer to something like Australopithecus, a much older branch of the family tree. That's opened a real, ongoing argument about whether Homo floresiensis descended from erectus at all, or split off from the human lineage far earlier and simply survived on that one island, doing its own thing, for an extraordinarily long time while the rest of the family moved on without them. Either way, something ancient held on, alone, on one small island, for longer than your entire species has existed. And then, eventually, it didn't. Now here's the part of the story that used to have a much bigger, much creepier ending. When Homo floresiensis was first announced, the dating suggested they survived until roughly 12,000 years ago, meaning your species and theirs would have shared that island for tens of thousands of years, at the same time breathing the same air. That claim alone made international headlines. Then in 2016, archaeologist Thomas Sutikna's team went back to Liang Bua with better dating methods and found the original excavation had been quietly distorted. The ground itself had shifted and eroded over time, sliding older layers upward and making the fossils read younger than they actually were. The corrected date pushed the youngest confirmed Homo floresiensis remains back to around 50,000 years ago. Read that again. Not 12,000. 50,000. One correction, and the ending of the story completely changed. Instead of a long, slow overlap lasting tens of millennia, the real window looks much tighter. Right around the same time, modern humans were first reaching that part of Southeast Asia. Which brings us back to you, standing at that tree line, and the uncomfortable question underneath all of it. Did we have something to do with this? Nobody's found a smoking gun. No mass grave, no clear evidence of violence between the two species. What researchers have found instead is almost stranger. Signs of a major volcanic eruption near Liang Bua. Right around the same time, Homo floresiensis disappears from the fossil record. Flores sits in an active volcanic zone, and an eruption that size could devastate food sources and habitat fast enough to finish off a population that was already small and isolated to begin with. So the two leading explanations don't compete. They braid together. A species finely tuned to one small, stable island for the better part of 1 million years, suddenly hit with two pressures arriving close together, a volcanic disaster reshaping the landscape, and the arrival of a taller, bigger-brained, far more adaptable human species, moving into the same territory, with different tools and different strategies. Was it the ash? Was it us? Was it both, arriving within a few thousand years of each other and simply finishing what the other started? Nobody currently alive has a clean answer, and anyone who tells you they do is skipping a step. Being a specialist is a brilliant strategy for surviving 1 million years of ordinary conditions. It's a terrible strategy for surviving sudden change, when the ground fell out from under them, literally in ash, or figuratively in competition. Homo floresiensis simply didn't have the flexibility that carried their relatives elsewhere. We do something similar to islands today, just without the volcanoes doing the finishing move for us. Species stranded on small, isolated habitats, island foxes, Komodo dragons themselves, countless endemic birds, are exactly the populations conservation biologists worry about most. For precisely the same reason, perfectly adapted to one narrow, stable niche and one bad season or one new arrival away from catastrophe. We just call it habitat fragmentation now instead of a folktale, and instead of a stork with a taste for hominins, the modern threat is usually a shipping container with an invasive rat in it. And speaking of folktales, we should probably circle back to the Ebu Gogo, because it's the detail that makes this whole thing stick with you. Local legend describes small, hairy, cave-dwelling people who mimicked human speech without truly speaking it, stole food, and were eventually driven off after one final violent encounter with the villagers' ancestors. Anthropologists are careful here. There's no way to confirm this is literal, cultural memory rather than coincidence, or a story invented long after the fact to explain something else entirely. But it's genuinely strange that a population on Flores had, independent of any fossil evidence, been describing something that sounds remarkably like a small, non-modern human living alongside them. We used to picture human evolution as a single line, marching steadily forward toward us, like a highlight reel with one hero. It wasn't. For most of the last few million years, it was a crowded, tangled family tree with multiple human species alive on the same planet at the same time, sometimes on the very same small patch of jungle, watching each other from opposite sides of a tree line. So go back to that moment. You, at the edge of the jungle, looking at something small and human-shaped looking back. That tree line is empty now. Every last one of them gone, not to a single dramatic ending, but to a fire in the ground and a taller cousin species that simply outlasted them. We're just the branch that happened to make it out.